to session. Items 1 through 4 are executive sessions and direction to staff. Items 1 and 3 are executive session. Ms. Clerk, you are requested to read the language to go into executive session.
Your Honor, the first executive session is noticed as item 1, executive session, discussion on Mayor and Council's position regarding Central Arizona Project Board of Directors approval of Rosemont Copper's water storage and recharge request, and is being held pursuant to ARS Section 38-43103A3 and A4. The second executive session is noticed as item 3, executive session, review of city attorney, and is being held pursuant to ARS Section 38-43103A1 and A3.
And Ms. Clerk, Mr. Rankin has an announcement on the first executive.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I've asked for a continuance of items 1 and 2 relating to the CAP Rosemont issue for us to prepare some additional information and have some different staff available for you in advance of the next the meeting. When we do have this executive session, I'll make sure to make the rounds and brief you all in individually.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. So with that, we do have items 3 and 4. So may I have a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to go into executive session. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So what we're going to do is, as we typically do, is jump off of this meeting and then jump into our executive session Teams meeting. So I'll see you on the other side. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. What is the council's pleasure on item 4?
Madam Mayor, I believe that the city clerk attorney has a motion to read, and I'll make the motion on it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. An appropriate motion would be to proceed as discussed in executive session and to schedule an item on a regular session in March for the reappointment of the city attorney.
The amount of 245, right, was the cap. Is that right?
I leave that to you.
So
That'll be part of the item at that time.
okay.
So I need a motion.
So moved.
I made the motion, so moved. Second.
Second.
Motion in a second. 2 motions and 2 seconds. Excellent. So all those, any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Rankin, you're with us for another 2 years.
Thank you all, and thank you for the evaluation and review. It was very important to me, so thank you.
Thank you for your hard work. You're a very important part of this organization. We appreciate you a lot. We move on to item 5. Item 5 has been set aside for an update on the COVID-19 pandemic, employee requirements, and legal matters. Mr. Manager, I just have, unfortunately, we were not able to have Dr. Cullen with us today from Pima County Health Department, but they did send a snapshot just to make sure that I communicated with you all on the council about how COVID is looking in Pima County. There's a total number of new cases today in Pima County. We're 290 cases. Total number of new deaths today were 3. Percentage of vaccinated people in Pima County is 74.6%, which is really leading Arizona. It's a great number for all of us to have. I would still encourage our community to continue. If you have not received your vaccine, please get your 3 shots to make sure that you add to the percentage of vaccinated people in Pima County, especially children from 5 to 12. I think those numbers are low in Pima County, and so we need to continue encouraging parents to vaccinate their babies. The number of new tests reported today were 3,281 tests, with a total percentage of positivity of 10.2%, which is considerably much better place than what we were about a month ago. So 10.2%, we were at like 30-40% positivity rate. This is very, very good news, and really happy that the wave of Omicron cases is way down. So I know that Pima County did not renew their mask mandate. They're going to let it expire at the end of this month. But I did really want the city manager to talk to us about what it means for the city of Tucson, and then also what it means for mask wearing in city of Tucson buildings, which I believe Pima County is leaving their mandatory mask inside of their buildings, and I think we should do the same. And I believe they said not instituting it at any outside events. So, Mr. Manager, did you want to add to it and fill in the blanks and the gaps that I didn't talk about?
No, Mayor, I think you hit it on the head. As you mentioned, the ordinance or the requirement within the county will expire on the 28th, which is next Monday. They will keep in place their current rules with regard to masking in county buildings and facilities. I'm going to try to mirror that as best I can, but at this point, I have no intent of relaxing the masking requirement for city facilities. So I'll keep you posted as if that evolves or changes. We'll certainly be taking the health department's lead on it. Thank you, Mayor.
I think the CDC has not really come out with more concrete recommendations. So I think it's a good idea to also pay attention to what the CDC is putting out. Councilmember Cunningham.
A couple things on this item, and I just wanted to, one, as we cross your fingers, knock on wood, hop on one foot, whatever, approach somewhat of an endemic status. Applaud everybody for all the work they've done in this last 2 years. This has not been easy, and you know we're not out of the woods yet, but man, it's been long. A couple things though. Well, as we phase into the city buildings, the real question is we've got some city buildings that I'd like to see opened as soon as we can. I think right now, and this needs to be said publicly, the net positive to public health by having our recreation centers closed is not a net positive. It is now a net negative. So I hope that we are working very fast to get those buildings open full. You know, I'd love to see that done by the end of March. I really don't want to see a phase in taking into the summer and stuff like that. The other piece is I'd really like to, as I know it may snow tonight, so I say this with a grain of salt. I'd really like to see if we can get our public pools open a little earlier this year. And I think those things are COVID related. You know, I think one of the things that has been missed, it hasn't been missed, it's just been kind of like, we know, but we didn't know what to do, is we're in this weird thing where you've done everything virtually, you've done everything with a mask, you've done everything without human interaction, and you know, there's no, right now there's no hugging hello, there's no this, there's no that, there's no nice to meet, you know, there's no lean in nice to meet yous. It's a little rough, right? So I think by having these things open, like our pools and our rec centers, we're giving people the opportunity to mix it up again and socialize again and associate with each other again. And I think that's a net positive for public health. Again, as safe as we can. I don't want to promulgate spreading disease. I don't want to be a super spreader or anything like that. But I think those two things are what's on my mind. Just because we're coming to an endemic doesn't mean we have to stop making tough decisions. We always have to think, as leaders, we always have to think of what's next. And what's next is getting our recreation centers and pools open. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Kosacek.
Perhaps a little different perspective on that. We had nearly 3,000 new cases in Pima County of COVID last week. That's last week. A year ago at this time, that was a monthly figure. So we, you know, while I agree that you know, if we can get recreation centers and all those activity sites open, what I don't want to do is I don't want to jump the gun again and wind up having the same conversation 12 months from now, because we've given the variant another opportunity to evolve and you know, change its own course. Ultimately, science sets the rules, and I you know, we're all getting the calls from people saying we want to go out and, you know, shoot hoop together, and we want to swim, and we want to do all these wonderful things. And while I agree with that, I want to give high marks to Laura Hamway and her team for being cautious, realizing that she's balancing, and her team is balancing the interests of people who really want to get out and start interacting, with the fact that they may be interacting with people who are immune compromised, people who are seniors, people who are in a different situation. And so I want to ask to exercise caution and not jump the gun. I do support the continuation of an indoor mask requirement, again, in recognition of the fact that while we have a significant number of our residents who have received 2 shots, we have a relatively low number of people who've been boosted. And so it's not as though everyone's all on board for this. So again, slowly but surely, but with the emphasis on slowly.
Councilmember Fimbres?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Councilman Kozaczyk. We need to err inside of caution. I had a conversation with the president of the university, and they're waiting to see what's happening with spring break, what's going to happen with there, and he's recommending that they wear the mask and that they get their shots or be tested before they leave and when they come back. Because this thing could happen again, and I understand there's another variant out there. But we got very cautious. And I applaud your efforts, Madam Mayor. I know we took a lot of got beat up a lot for our efforts, but we did the right thing. I think I'd like to see how we save so many lives in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. Any others? Something that we also have to think about whenever it's safe, is the possibility of having in-person meetings again and using our chamber again. But we really do have to be careful and err on the side of precaution. But my staff and I were talking about this today during lunch, and we were saying that I have staff here that have never attended a council meeting in chambers. I have a couple of staff that just went to one meeting at council chambers, but I crave that time that we spend together as a council and be able to develop our relationships as people, as colleagues, but also with making sure that it's the right time, that we call the right time, and that we take every precaution we possibly can. So with that, we're just going to move on to item 6. Mr. Manager, did you want to include anything on the COVID item? Anything else? No? Okay.
No,
so we
Mayor,
move on
you.
to all righty, perfect. So we move on to item 6. Time has been set aside for an update on the fiscal year 2022 financial position in the fiscal 2023 budget process. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have a presentation for you. It was included in your materials. We'll just briefly go over it. Jeff Yates, our finance director, will go over the first part, which is just an update on the financials. Then he'll turn it over to me. I'll talk through the budget process that I'm proposing for your consideration, and then talk about some things we need to pay attention to going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Mike. Honorable Mayor, members of council, it's good to see you. We have, as Mike mentioned, we want to just cover a couple of things today. We want to talk about the general fund balance where we ended June 30, 2021. Tonight's regular agenda, the auditors will be here to kind of close the year out and get us focused in on 22 and 23 going forward. We want to talk about the current budget status, current snapshot of that, kind of the trends we're seeing, and then the manager will talk about the budget development for 23, and then some of those economic trends that can possibly impact 2023. So with that, we ended the year very well, very good in the fund balance for the general fund. We are fully funding our stabilization and reserve unassigned reserve policies, which I know is a very important piece for you as a mayor and council, and for us financially. We have about $69.7 million above our policy levels. What that means is that we fulfill all of our policies, and then we have additional. That'll come into play as we go forward in the budget process, and we really start talking about a multi-year strategy around a spending plan, how to use that fund balance, and how to achieve a lot of your goals and the objectives that you set out for us as a city. So that'll be a lot of the discussion going forward. And as we kind of sit back on those reserve policies and the unassigned fund balance, the city is really well positioned to weather economic headwinds. And when we say headwinds, what we mean are the impacts of the things we'll talk about later. But as you all know, the news, there's lots going on. So we need to be focused on sustainability as we go through this and fiscal responsibility. And I think the council has set that stage very well and has set the city in a really strong place going forward so that anything that comes up, we can weather over the next few years. So what we're seeing this year, we are seeing really strong sales tax growth, as you can imagine. With inflation up, we're seeing a little bit better than 9.1% above our budgeted numbers. So to give you an idea, that's about 16% year over year growth. So through this time last year, I looked at the number yesterday, I look at it weekly, and it was right at 16%. We're seeing strong growth in restaurants, not surprising, and travel, those categories, and retail, where we saw a big growth early on that during the pandemic in the remote sellers. Now we're seeing brick and mortar retail kind of bounce back. So those are all good signs as we go forward. Through January 2022, we're right at about 58.8% of our budget. You remember, you can't just take a city budget and divide it by 12. It ebbs and flows, but we're right about where we'd expect to be. And then the revenues are in line with our expectation. We're thinking we're going to see about, or right now we've received about 11.7 million more in revenue than what we spent. And that's purely on a cash flow basis. There are multiple months where we actually spend more than we get in revenue, and then the other months we make that up where we get more revenue than expenditure. So all of these things point us to that we're having a good year. We're going to continue to monitor everything that's going on. We meet weekly, look at sales tax, vacancy trends, all kinds of different factors that go into that. I will say one thing that has turned out really well for us in our projections last spring during this time, if you remember, we were talking about the ability to do our pay increases and do the market rate adjustments. We are right on track, and we were able to absorb those adjustments. So everything we thought would happen has happened fairly, for the most part. We're always a little off, so we're not always perfect, but it's happening as we anticipated. So this is actually, the year is going as we would expect. So that's good news from my perspective. Finance guys hate surprises from that perspective. So it's going really well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the manager and let him talk about process. And Mike, if you just want to tell me when to flip slides, then I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. I appreciate it. So Mayor and members of the council, here's what I'm suggesting or proposing that you consider for the FY23 year. So keep in mind that there were a lot of uncertainties in the 21 year when we started the budget process. There were a lot of uncertainties. And so we went through and we made a lot of estimates, a lot of projections. And I think, as Jeff mentioned, we've done well, we've done okay. It almost gives the impression that, you know, we're rolling in dough, you know, we've got all this money. And I hate to be the one to be the bearer of bad news, but we really aren't. I think that on paper and financially it looks great, and I can demonstrate that for you. But the needs are far greater than what those revenues look like. So here's what I'm suggesting for the coming year. What I'd like to encourage is, let's take our FY22 budget amounts and move them into the FY23 budget. So basically, no changes to the line items, no changes to the amounts, with the exception of inflationary costs. So for example, if we have an escalator in a contract, that would go up by some commensurate amount. When we did the market, pay adjustments, we did not include those in the budget because those were out of vacancy savings. So what I'd like to suggest is we'll build those in to see where we are for the 23 year. My expectation is that based on our projections today, we'll have an amount that I'll call reserve for supplementals, an amount that's greater, you know, more revenue than the actual expenditures. What I'd like to suggest is, as a part of the budget, we put that aside in the general government and we call it reserve for supplementals. And then have that conversation about where those dollars are distributed across the board starting in July or August. Basically gets us through the budget process, but gives us an opportunity to really think about where those investments can be made, both in terms of one time, and I'll talk about that in a second, as well as ongoing and potential expansion of some services. The bottom line is it gives us more time to talk through those supplementals, gives us more time for the departments to make presentations, have dialogue about their needs, really start to frame what those conversations can look like, not only in 23, but beyond. So the conversation partially needs to be about the fund balance. So Jeff mentioned we've got, excuse me, over 63 million or 69 million in available fund balance. Again, sounds like a lot of money, and where I come from it is, but the reality is that we have many, many more needs than that. And so part of this supplemental reserve conversation is a conversation about fund balance and how the investments need to be made in our systems, right? I would include the $18 million annually that we've allocated for public safety as a part of previous conversations, the $15 million, a portion of which would come from general fund in these conversations. But there's also others as well. We have other vehicles, we have facilities that needed to be addressed. We have investments that we've made in our park systems and a variety of other facilities just across the board that need investment. And so we've got to develop a game plan for over the next 5 years, very similar to what I presented to you in the past. It really outlines how those dollars can be invested in and expended. So my suggestion, Mayor and members of the council, is that we go through this, and I'll call it simplified. Every year I try to simplify it, but it doesn't always work that way. The idea and the intent is to provide opportunity and space, time, for not only the departments to weigh in on their supplementals, you to weigh in on supplementals, but also the public, really taking that transparency conversation to the next level of saying, here's the conversation about these dollars that might be available. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I won't read these for you or to you. They're in my memo. But I do want to point out that things are good right now. We're tracking positively on our revenue streams. We're looking pretty strong. But there are some cautions that we need to pay attention to. This is the kind of stuff that we have to watch closely. Look for national, even international or worldwide trends that could affect us and affect our ability to achieve the projections that we put out in the budget. The other piece that's still out there, and you've heard me talk about this before, is our staffing and staffing levels. And the Great Resignation has certainly been something that has hit us. I'm happy to report that our vacancies are down to about 10%. They were ranging up around 15%. So we've made some good strides there. But it's also anticipating what those vacancies look like as we start to see folks leave their posts and so forth. So there are some things we have to pay attention to. The key, I think, is as we talk about the fund balance, as we talk about the budget going forward, is to make sure that we're paying attention to those and providing ourselves flexibility, providing yourselves flexibility so that in the course of the next 5 years, you have built-in flexibility to address some of these issues that might come up. Understanding that the needs are heavy in terms of some of the facilities, some of the things that I already mentioned, but developing that game plan gives us something by which to point to say, okay, here's the vision, here's the opportunity for us to move forward. So with that, Mayor, I'll stop. I'm happy to answer questions on the process, the budget process, talk about fund balance. I'll talk about, pretty much any of it that you all would like to hear more about. You can take the presentation down now, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I do see some hands up. Councilmember Kozachik.
Thank you. Mike and/or Jeff, where do vacancy savings factor into your cash carry forward projection? What chunk of that number are they?
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Kozachik. So there's actually two parts to that. They're not factored into the going forward as far as cash flow goes, other than to cover in the coming year our projected raises that we gave as a part of the market. Even today, we are assuming between an 8 to 10% vacancy going forward. Although as we go into the 23, 24, and 25 years, that number may stay the same, but the actual vacancy from it will shrink. Right now, we're projected to be about $8 million above. And quite frankly, a big chunk of that the actual vacancy savings is eaten up by overtime. You know, if you actually run the numbers in terms of vacancies, you'll see that it's about $17 million. But we're on track to expend over 9 million of that in just overtime. And so we're going to watch that very closely as it ebbs and flows over the next 3 years, because it will be impacted both by salaries as well as by that overtime number. My expectation and hope is that as we fill those positions, particularly in the public safety ranks, that overtime number will drop dramatically.
Well, we've had the conversation before about back 10 years ago, the vacancy saving number was used as a way to balance our budget at the end of the year, and we're beyond that. We need to be beyond that, and so it needs to be a real number. Are these vacancies we really intend to fill, or is it a kind of, to use the term, is it a slush fund that we're going to rely on to pay overtime? So I'd like to see us get to the point where when we have vacancies that we have on the books, that we really intend to fill them. So it's a real number going forward, and it's not just, you know, here's some money we can rely on later on. Next question is where I'm still unclear as to the process by which we identify projects and get them funded with these ward-specific allocations that we've spoken about. What are we supposed to be doing with that? Because I don't want to get to July 1st and say, well, you guys missed that boat, and you know now you can't select any projects.
Darn it, you caught me. See, I was hoping to just carry it over.
I know.
No, actually, far from that. So first and foremost, and I think you've heard me say this, I have really encouraged us getting away from a use it or lose it mentality, and that's across the board. And so the dollars that are allocated in whatever program, and that includes the departments, if there is a need to carry it over, we just do that. So if for whatever reason you're not able to expend those dollars in 1 year, you just have to let us know so we can program it into the following year. So for example, if you have money left over from 1 year that you want to move into the following year to do a bigger project, you can do that. You just need to let us know. Okay. So please know as a mayor and council, we've really gotten away from a use it or lose it mentality. So that's number one. Number two, the process was to be established really by you all in terms of the public participation and the conversations. However, with guidance from us and from our finance staff. So if you're interested, you know, we can talk offline and we can go into what that conversation looks like to give you we'll call it the framework for the conversation that you all can move forward on.
So just tell us who the direct point of contact is, so that we know who to reach out to when we have suggestions.
And Steve, I just wanted to jump on your commentary, because I was going to ask the same question in terms of how do we envision incorporating the participatory budgeting process that we all have. I think it would be really beneficial to establish, you know, a process that we can all use, and then each council office and the mayor's office could tweak according to their needs and their wants and how they envision those funds being used in their wards. But it would really be helpful to have a bit of a cookie cutter process that we can all use and then change around and move around according to the needs. I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Two more quick ones. Similar to that last one, can you, Mike, give us an indication as to where we are in the grant allocation for the ARPA, the ARPA grants?
Sure. So Mayor, Councilmember Kozaczek, we sent out notices yesterday to those agencies and those groups. So literally it was sent out yesterday. So it's the next step. There's still another step to go, but hopefully those dollars will be distributed within the next week or two at the latest. So I was going to report that under my report, but you saved me the need for that. But they were sent out. We're very excited about that, and we're going to keep moving, pushing it hard to get it out ASAP.
It's good news. My last question is, so I don't want to put more work in Jeff's lap, but you want to do the simplified budget process. I'm enough of a wonk to appreciate some of the details, and I'd like to see more of a breakdown. You know, how close are we to our 10% policy for reserves? You know, what about our capital reserves? You know, where are we in our debt service trend line? And you know, what impact is PSPRS debt having with our, you know, more broad budget? So while I don't, you know, it's March almost right now, so we don't have the time to go through the, you know, what we used to go through, but I am interested in seeing some of the granular data before we check that last box on June 15th or whenever it winds up being. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Mayor, I don't normally comment on a comment, but I just wanted to reassure you that, and I don't mean to downplay the detail that we'll give you as a part of the budget. All of the things that you mentioned, impact of PSPRS, you know, the POBs, all of that conversation will still happen. I'm just really talking about the supplementals, you know, where you get a list of supplementals up front, and then there's a lot of conversation about it as a part of the budget process. The granular level conversation will still happen because it needs to, quite frankly. And so you'll have a lot more detail than just what I maybe made it sound like, and I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega and Councilmember Kozachik. Councilmember Fimbres?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Jeffrey and Mike, what specific municipal costs and services have gone up during this past fiscal year? And are you keeping trends of what's going on at the national level right now with Russia and Ukraine and the gas prices and stuff? Can you shed some light on what you guys are doing to prepare us for the future?
Sure, Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres. So just simplistically, when you talk about Ukraine and some of the challenges there, oil prices are one thing that we watch closely. Barrel, you know, price per barrel, which has an impact throughout all of the you know, goods and services that we use because of the petroleum-based products. And it's everything from, you know, construction to all of the you know, the durable goods that we use. It is of concern, as I think the memo mentioned. We're tracking somewhere around 10. We're expecting an increase in some of our products of about 10, almost 11%. And so when you look at that, it gets our attention in terms of making sure that we anticipate some of that. Now, I will tell you, I'm not building in a buffer for that, but I am building in an expectation that we're going to have to adjust. And like what we've done in the past, you might remember when we established a fuel reserve, you know, making sure that we have dollars set aside specifically for the ebb and flow of gas and diesel prices for our vehicles. Those are important pieces that we'll build in, but it'll be real clear so that you understand where it's built in, so it's not perceived as being an inefficient use of funds.
Now, we're being competitive with our personnel. We just had a meeting with one of our lawyers that talked about being competitive there. How do I look with our rankings? Because I keep hearing people are jumping over to the county or to other counties in the state. I make sure that we're looking at what we're doing with our personnel, especially bus drivers, environmental service folks and stuff. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Fimbres. So salary and competitiveness in the salary environment is extremely important. I did send you some information specific to the environmental services drivers. A quick update on that is that we do have a meeting later this week, I believe it's tomorrow actually, with some of those ES drivers to talk about their job description. The fundamental component there was the job description that was compared to the market accurate? And that's a fair question and a fair review. So we're going to explore that and make sure of that. But taking a little bit of a step back, the competitiveness of the market will continue to be a challenge for us because ultimately we start chasing salaries and it doesn't matter what the field is. And so what I've challenged the staff to do is think through how do we become that employer of choice? You've heard me mention that before. What does it look like? How do we compete in an environment that is not only extremely competitive from a salary standpoint, but also resonating with that employee, that they're going to be part of something really cool and something really amazing. So it's an all hands on deck conversation. I have tasked Eric Esmirzak and Elsa Quijada to really look at what that means in terms of that effort for recruitment. And I'm confident, based on some of the numbers that I've seen, that we've got a great game plan and we're starting to see some movement. The other piece, and I'll leave it at this, is also looking at how we can onboard folks faster through contracts in contractors, but really temp employees that we can move quickly through the system and then eventually onboard them as a permanent employee. So those are the kinds of things that are not typical government approaches, but we're definitely all over.
I appreciate your efforts, Mike, and thank you. You and Jeff have done a great job keeping us and giving us some reserves. Appreciate it, but we're not out of the woods yet. But thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Councilmember Fimbres. I too wanted to add, I think I'm very happy with the financial picture that, frankly, our city manager, my colleagues on the council, and I have been working very, very hard for years to get to where we are. And so I really want to do some patting on the back, Jeff and Mr. Ortega and all of your team for leading us and guiding us, mayor and council, to a very good, healthy position that we are. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I really am happy that you're looking at the possibilities of what's happening in the world, right? And how it affects our fuel prices and how it affects our construction projects in the city of Tucson. We've got to definitely have a fund that will help us weather that storm because of the imbalance and the changes around the world. I think we have to, that's very smart to think about that. What I'd like to make sure that is part of this conversation, I know that this is an initial piece of starting to talk about budget, but I'd like to make sure that we have also the reporting on the PSPRS and TSRS and their health. How is our trust fund for PRS doing? And a little bit more thorough discussion on that. Also, in terms of employee pay, I want to make sure that all compression issues have been figured out. There are certain positions when we took the historic step of paying, of doing a market rate increase to all of the city of Tucson employees. I know that there were very specific positions that we still had to do more work on, like IT, planning and development services, other specific positions that we were way offline in terms of how much we paid and what the market was. So I really want to make sure that those positions are adjusted to what we need, including the environmental services concerns that AFSCME has with our environmental service truck operators. As well as last year, what we said that we would never do is not keep up with inflation, right? Not keep up with cost of living. And so I just want to make sure that we're thinking about the numbers and the budget for next year with the cost of living adjustments that we should be making throughout the organization. So cost of living adjustments, I think, is an important piece of the conversation as we think about vacancies and we think about right sizing the city of Tucson in our organization, as well as so that we don't get in the trouble that we were in previous years because we had not kept up with the market. So those are my commentary, and I know that Councilmember Cunningham has his hand up. Go ahead, Councilmember.
So I've actually had this conversation offline with a couple people, and I thought I'd thread the needle today instead of doing a future study session. You know, with the financial position we're in, and kind of what we're thinking about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years down the line, would it be appropriate now to say, look, if there's a scenario in which possibly purchasing or finding a non-activated property that if we took ownership of it could actualize long-term cost savings in the public services, say transit or housing or recreation, transit, housing, just or just municipal ops, municipal services. Are we looking at those opportunities? Do you guys need direction to be looking for those opportunities? And does that need to be a separate item, or can we do that within this discussion?
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, so you've given me direction prior to this with regard to housing and looking at some investments there. I am always looking for ways to save dollars. And so if you know individually of some opportunities that might be out there, we can certainly explore them at the staff and administrative level. And then if it looks like a policy discussion, I can certainly recommend bringing it back. But certainly always up for feedback on ways that we might be able to save some dollars and make sure we're investing where the community needs it.
And again, I'm not saying that every scenario is like that, but I'm saying we have different areas where we have properties that are just underutilized or completely not being used, in which we may have needs for public safety annexes. We may have needs for recreational activity. We may have needs for transit hubs. We may have needs, and looking at those different sites and saying, hey, this is a good opportunity for us. That's kind of where I'm going with this, but I want to make sure we're within the budget discussion to have it. I'd rather have this discussion now than have to do an entire another hour of study session on a later date.
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, so let me suggest this. As I mentioned, part of the conversation is the fund balance and how we use those dollars going forward. And I think what that could translate into is an opportunity for us to talk about allocation of dollars for that type of investment. And that would be the appropriate time to have that conversation. Now we don't have to have a separate, it can be a part of the budget, and it's part of the dollars that we've allocated as a part in that fund balance discussion.
Do you guys want any type of motion, or can we just leave it at be that this discussion represents kind of some staff direction to take a look at those opportunities? Would we need a formal motion, like an everybody say aye type motion on that, or not?
Yeah, Councilmember, I don't think this is the moment to do it, because I totally agree with you that we should definitely think about purchasing property opportunity, capital improvements in our buildings, those types of, but I think it would be best if we have a much more informed conversation. I think the city manager understands where we're all feeling we could put the fund balance to good use.
No, I was just trying to figure out a way to do it so we didn't have to have another conversation. That's all. It seemed like this kind of was an opportune moment to do that. So it's no big deal. I just wanted to put that out there. Other than that, seeing where we are from a cash position long term, our projections are factoring in the projections that you're running. I guess my first question is, are they factoring in all the new salaries that we've added in and filling all of our vacancies? Is that Jeff, Mike, is that for our projections going into the 2, 3, 4 year projections, are we covered?
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, the short answer is sort of. We are covered, but it isn't exactly the way you outlined. So we've got all the new salaries projected in, but if you remember when we started the discussion, I gave you a ramp up plan based on just our physical ability to fill positions. So I had, certain percentages, particularly in police and in communications. Those were the two big ones where it's highly unlikely that I'm going to be at 100% filled. But back to Councilman Kozachik's point, it's a realistic projection of what those expenses will be, as opposed to, hey, you budget here and then you've got all this extra money for other purposes. That's not the spirit and intent of this conversation. But as we go forward, that number, that vacancy number will ebb and flow, but it will track with that information that I provided you several months ago now, when we really went through the vacancies and the game plan for how we fill them and how we finance the market rate adjustments.
Next question is, have we factored in going live and where we're opening buildings more publicly, or we're opening facilities more publicly? If we're having council meetings live, not that that's a big, I think that's probably a drop in the bucket, but have we factored those additional costs in?
Mayor, Councilman Cunningham, yes, we've factored in. We don't think those will be huge costs, with the exception of some of the areas where we have trouble finding staff, and some of the rec centers, some of the pools, those kind of things that you'd mentioned earlier. We do have challenges there with the staffing level, but we have factored in, going down the path of filling positions and opening those facilities.
All right, finally, I know this got touched on earlier, but I think we really want to take a look at our PSPRS and TSRS solvency. I think that we've been making payments now. We've refined it. We've done a couple different strategies. We've done guaranteed money, and now we're going into year 6, 7, 8. You've squirreled away money and made extra payments. I remember you did that a couple of years ago, which was awesome, by the way. But I'd really like to see, as different jurisdictions are now catching up with where we were, they're hitting their camel hump. And so what I want to see is kind of between what the state's going to do to help those jurisdictions, because since they're not us, they probably will, but we'll have to get folded into the mix in retro. I want to make sure our interests are protected in retrospect. So with that in mind, I'd really like to see how much of an impact that's going to be. And the other thing I want to see is how much this overtime is going to impact our future contributions. So I know that's a tough one. It's going to be someone's going to have the dauntless and rather very detail-oriented task of having to comb through that data. But so I'm sorry for whoever gets the short stick on that, but I think it's data we need to really plan for the fiscal stability of our city.
Mayor, Councilman Cunningham, I appreciate that, but it isn't necessary to apologize, because we track that very closely, and really leadership of our local PSPRS board. Mayor, I know you're on that, chair that, but also our trust, our PSPRS trust for our pension obligation bonds have been great, as has our TSRS trust board as well. I mean, they've been amazing. And so we track that and work closely with them. Keep in mind, we have yet to transfer all of the pension obligation bond proceeds over to the PSPRS, state fund. We're still watching that closely. That will probably be a recommendation down the road, but we watch that very closely, and we will have a full report. Back to Councilman Kozachek's point, that's some of the granular data that we'll provide as a part of the budget, but there is a conversation there about, how the investments are doing versus how we projected. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr.
I guess
Manager.
my last thing is great job and best of luck.
Mr. Councilmember Cunningham. We have other hands up, but I did want to include that in the report that Jeff gave us, we do have a 69.7, I believe you said, Jeff, in terms of fund balance. Now we have to remember, and I think Mr. Manager, you talked about this, it's that fund, that projected fund balance, we just put an item for the voters of Tucson to consider funding our half-cent sales tax for roads and safety. And we have committed verbally, and I think in writing now, that some of that fund balance will be used for capital improvements and other needs for our public safety and community safety departments, police, fire, and 911, as well as we've committed to putting additional fund from general fund or fund balance to collector streets investment. So it's not like we have this huge fund balance that is, we can put $69 million to work because we've already started committing some of that fund balance into some of the infrastructure investments that we need. So Mr. Ortega, did you want to add to that commentary? Because I know that we have to be realistic of what we can do with that fund balance.
Absolutely, Mayor, you're right on target. As I mentioned, out of that, you've already got 18 million for public safety, assuming that the Prop 411 passes, that comes right off the top. On top of that, we have somewhere in the vicinity of about 5 to 8 million, depending on when the revenues come in for collector streets, you know, as a part of that 15 million for collector. And oh, by the way, we've got all these other investment needs. So again, it sounds like a lot of money, and I don't want to downplay, because it is. And to your point, Mayor, and you know, the leadership that you all have demonstrated has not only built up our reserves, but given us that opportunity to invest. But I will tell you, and you'll probably hear me say it umpteen times, even all that money is not enough to address all of the needs that we have. That's the magnitude that we're dealing with. So it is important to keep that in mind and temper the excitement a little bit.
And Councilmember Kozachik, and then we'll have to move on to the next item.
Okay. Yeah, to that point, that's the value in seeing some of the more granular data, because that 69 million then would be netted out. You know, it's 51, then it's 46, and you know, so that we have a net number that we're really looking at. So that's important. You know how that waterfall works. Question that you just made a comment to one of Paul's questions about PSPRS. You said that there is money building up in a fund that we haven't allocated to that debt service yet. Where's the fund? How is it being accumulated? And what's going to be the impact on the rest of the budget once we transfer those funds over? Why haven't we transferred them over yet?
It's a great question, Mayor, Councilmember Kozachik. Just to refresh your memory, the way that we approached this, we went out and we sold, I believe it was $650 million in debt, basically. And we put those dollars, those proceeds, into a trust account. And that trust account was created specifically to pay the PSPRS debt. We chose at the time not to transfer all of that money into the state PSPRS, because quite frankly, we wanted to see what their investments were going to do. So we created, I think it was a Trust 115, we created a trust board that will manage those dollars. And it's very, very explicit. It can only be used for that purpose. So it's off of our books, if you will, because we went through that exercise and established that trust. And those dollars then are they're making the payments, okay? So they make the payments to PSPRS. But the bulk of the unfunded liability is still with PSPRS, covered by that trust amount. So I can explain it to you in a little more detail, but it's very simplistically, we sold that debt, or we sold those bonds, put it into a trust account specifically to pay the PSPRS unfunded liability and our ongoing cost.
It was also to cap our annual payments at 90 million.
That's correct. And the reason that it does that is because we're taking advantage of the return on investment. So absolutely. So when the council did that, it was an opportunity to go out and take advantage of the returns on the open market, as opposed to paying interest on our unfunded liability. So we're not paying that interest on those dollars. We're actually gaining interest on the dollars we have in that trust account. We'll give you a more detailed.
All right, I can do it offline with you, but what will cause us to actually begin transferring dollars is to accelerate payoff on the debt service?
No, it's to accelerate payoff of the unfunded liability in the PSPRS.
Yeah, got it.
No, absolutely. And so keep in mind, a big part of that is our confidence that if we write them $600 million check, right, to the state, that it will in fact reduce our unfunded liability in the long term. And so who's going to manage those dollars? The council at the time, through my suggestion, was to establish a local board that will manage those investments. Ultimately, and my goal is to do it in 3 to 5 years, we'll transfer all those dollars to the state and let them manage it based on their portfolio. They've had some management changes in the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, which have done great. And I'm really getting more comfortable with our ability to just move those dollars there and let them manage it going forward.
Alrighty,
Thank you, Mayor.
thank you so much. Thank you. Of course, we're moving on to the next item. Thank you so much, Jeff and Mr. Manager. Really appreciate the presentation. Did you need to add anything else?
No, Mayor, thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
Alrighty. Alrighty. So I am super excited about this next. Not that the financial report doesn't excite me, but which with the numbers we have is really, really good, very exciting. But item 7 is the climate action and adaptation plan update. Time has been set aside for a discussion and update on the climate action and adaptation plan. And Mr. Manager, if it's okay, I'm going to start off the conversation and then have either you or Mr. Tamir continue with the presentation, and then of course have an opportunity to have a representative of Borough Happold, which the City of Tucson has hired to create our climate action plan. It's a wonderful pleasure, like I said, to introduce this item and talk about the efforts that we have been diligently working on as mayor and council. I am a climate mayor, and I am part of an alliance of climate mayors throughout the country. And so when I first ran as a candidate, I made it a point to listen to the citizens of Tucson. And one of the biggest issues that they talked to me about, and they continue completely engaged with, is how do we become a climate resilient city? And how do we as Tucson lead in Arizona, throughout the country, and the Southwest, to prepare ourselves in terms of sustainability? In 2019, actually, I think it was December of 2019, that I led a retreat with my colleagues on the council. We all together identified the need to have a climate action plan and an implementation strategy as a priority for the City of Tucson. In the past 2 years, I am proud to announce that we have advanced several climate and sustainability initiatives with the support of my colleagues on the council. In 2020, we declared a climate emergency and committed to developing a climate action plan that creates a path for carbon neutrality by 2030. Very aggressive goal, but something that we have been diligently working on since that time. Since we adopted the climate emergency, we have significantly advanced climate action efforts, including planting close to 40,000 trees and raising over $500,000 for the Tucson Million Trees Initiative. In partnership with Trees for Tucson, Tucson Clean and Beautiful. I have been diligently working with private partners to fundraise the $500,000 that goes directly to Tucson Clean and Beautiful, Trees for Tucson. And I have to thank the partners, the private partners that have funded that $500,000 in that effort, including TEP and others. Developing the EV readiness roadmap, we passed that together. We recently got an update on implemented actions and the next steps. Embarking on our zero waste efforts through the Sustainability Campus in anticipation of our commitment to develop a climate action plan. We also kickstarted the community engagement process. We haven't been waiting around to find a consultant for our climate action plan. So we kickstarted community engagement process with a community survey and climate listening sessions, where we reach more than 4,000 community members, and we're just getting started. Today, I'm happy to announce that we have hired an experienced and nationally recognized consulting firm and Borough Happold to help us develop our climate action plan. The climate action plan will be a roadmap to reach carbon neutrality while generating the most social, environmental, and economic benefits to our community. The climate action plan is a step forward to advance my vision and the vision of my colleagues on the council for a vibrant, resilient, and sustainable Tucson. This plan and other long-range plans will be an integral part of Plan Tucson. So the idea is to create the climate action plan and institute it as part of Plan Tucson, where voters can vote on the climate action plan along with our general plan for the city of Tucson. Tim Tamir will share a timeline of the climate action work done so far and an overview of the intersection of the climate action plan and Plan Tucson. So with that, I would like to invite Tim Tamir to do a presentation on this.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I will call up the presentation and then we will get going here. Can you confirm that you can see the PowerPoint? All right, I see the thumbs up from the mayor. That's all I need. Thank you very much. So Mayor and council, as you well know, we're at a critical moment with respect to climate change. The science has never been more complete. The risks are clear and present. And Tucson's mayor and council are taking and have taken meaningful action with regard to climate. Yet there's still much to do. And today is an opportunity to take stock of where we have been and to take the next steps toward a more equitable climate future with our climate action and adaptation plan. For decades, Tucson has established itself as a community that values stewardship. Examples of our past efforts include the world-class water conservation and water supply management programs of the city. This council's focus on financial stability, which we just discussed in the prior item, and our heartfelt efforts on community safety. As Tucson faces the risks of climate change, a review of mayor and council's actions over the past 2 years demonstrates the depth and breadth of this commitment to climate stewardship. You have provided policy guidance and momentum to our community through the following actions. And I'll just hit some of the highlights because the mayor did an outstanding job of identifying many of these actions, but they do bear repeating. As mentioned by our mayor, the mayor and council retreat from December of 2019 was a watershed moment for this council and for this community, as the need for a climate action plan was identified and soundly supported by her colleagues on the council. And that built on those prior stewardship efforts, but immediately started to bear results in the form of action. As noted, our mayor is a climate mayor, but more importantly, she's our climate mayor. So she's the climate mayor we care most about. And she has hired a climate and sustainability advisor to help her throughout the process of getting to an equitable climate future. And we began with some early efforts, including the adoption of a green stormwater infrastructure fee and fund, which has equity at its heart. And that was recently rebranded to Storm to Shade in February of 2022. Following closely up after that was the establishment of the Tucson Million Trees program, which the mayor highlighted the 40,000 trees planted so far and the $500,000 worth of funds that have been donated. And we are really building momentum around that program. By September of 2020, we had declared that climate emergency, which included the commitment to carbon neutrality by 2030, and to center our efforts on frontline communities, those most at risk or most impacted by climate effects are the ones that we need to have as our focal point moving forward. And the mayor and council also allocated funding for the climate action and adaptation plan. But while we were going through the process of soliciting that, the Climate Action Community Survey was conducted with over 4,000 responses and 200 hours of public comment. And those climate listening sessions were held. This was a year-long project that resulted in some identification of key concerns of our citizens of Tucson, which included heat, water, and equity, and the climate impacts associated with those, and some actions that were recommended for inclusion. And we are actually moving on some of these actions, our enhanced urban planning, our focus on public transportation, our focus and investment in trees and canopy in the community, our efforts around heat mitigation, and the focus of this council and our staff and our community on equitable investment. These lead to and have led to the development of the electric vehicle readiness roadmap, which pushed us in prime position not just to advance electrification of our fleet and our community, but our ability to access federal funding in that area to help us along the path. Coming up in March, we'll be hearing a lot more about the Los Reales Sustainability Campus and our efforts to get toward a zero waste city by 2050, and be a business incubator for those that like to work with us to turn our waste into products. We then ultimately did land a climate action consultant after a nationwide competitive recruitment, and we are now launching our climate action plan, which is expected to be completed by December of 2022. That's where we are today, and as we look toward the future, as noted by the mayor, our efforts will culminate in the development of our update to our general and sustainability plan, known as Plan Tucson, where the results of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, our Move Tucson Mobility Plan, One Water 2100, our housing and our housing affordability strategy for Tucson, and numerous other plans will all culminate toward a general plan that makes us a climate resilient city. With that, I'm proud to introduce the leaders of our consultant team from Borough Happold, Chris Ree and Louis Spanius.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you, Mayor, Madam Mayor, and members of the City Council. We're so excited to be in front of you today. My name is Chris Ree. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an associate principal at Bureau Happold, based in our Los Angeles office. Prior to entering consultancy, I worked in local government myself in Oakland, California, and in New York City. And one thing that I have seen evolve since climate action planning first started emerging in the mid-2000s is that we started with a very technocratic exercise, trying to understand where emissions came from. And now we have come to the realization that that's not enough. We have to center equity, inclusion, and reciprocity in our work and use our positions of authority to address and redress the historic and present harms in our communities. I find as practitioners, as climate practitioners, we are often in the position of unlearning societal norms, strengthening our cultural competencies, as well as our adaptive leadership skills. That's just a preface to some of the work that Bureau Happold has been conducting across the country. We work with local governments as well as non-governmental organizations like the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, as well as the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. This has been a delight for me. It's really a dream to be working with the city of Tucson in this effort, and we can't wait to get started. Next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of a few of our projects, as we wait for the slide to turn. One of our first efforts was in working with the city of New York on 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the very first climate action plan to comply with the core tenets of the Paris Climate Agreement back in 2017. We also worked with the County of Los Angeles on the Our County Sustainability Plan, which is broadly recognized as the boldest regional sustainability plan in the nation and truly centered on inclusive practices. And finally, we have authored multiple guides with C40 cities, including their Inclusive Climate Action Manual, which provides best practices in this regard. Let's go to the next slide. For this effort, we are not alone at Bureau Happold. We're very, very pleased to be teamed with a top-notch team working with Living Streets Alliance as our community engagement partner, as well as AutoCase, an economics consulting firm that will be working with us to really prove the cost-benefit assessment and multi-criteria analysis of climate measures, as well as the Drachman Institute at the University of Arizona's College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture, lending really that local climate and green infrastructure expertise. Let's keep moving. So one thing that is core to our approach at Bureau Happold, and especially for this effort, is that we truly do intend to center equity in the planning process. That is a recognition that climate change is inherently unfair, that it impacts frontline communities first and worst, including communities of color and low-income communities. So we have adopted what is called a targeted universalism framework, where we have universal goals such as carbon neutrality, and then the strategies are targeted specifically to equitably distribute the benefits and burdens. So we're really thinking about how we can address some of those historic inequities. Let's go to the next slide. And we dive deep in equity, and we have adopted the Urban Sustainability Directors Network definition of equity and sustainability, which breaks it down in 4 parts. And I'll actually go from right to left here. So transgenerational equity, this is really thinking about our impact on future generations, and can we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the impacts of climate change. Structural equity, really, this is a recognition of the systems and structures that have contributed to historic and present inequities, and really striving to address those wherever we can within this plan. Distributional is thinking about how do those benefits and burdens, how are they distributed across the community, both in geographic senses and non-geographic when we think about different population groups in Tucson. And then finally, procedural equity. And this is simply how do we think about inclusive engagement and representation when traditional methods of public engagement have all kinds of barriers to participation. An evening public meeting, or may not be possible for someone who is working multiple jobs, or has to consider childcare, or doesn't even speak the language that the workshop is being conducted in. So these are very tangible things that we will be addressing through a community engagement approach, which is the next slide. So we're busy right now working on a detailed strategy for community engagement. And here are some of the tools that we use. We do utilize with Living Streets Alliance stakeholder workshops. These are sort of what we might be fairly used to seeing and bringing folks around roundtable discussions. Community dialogues will be much more targeted. We're thinking about specifically the population groups who are impacted first and worst by climate change. And we're building upon the listening sessions and the surveys that were previously conducted, and noted that we want to increase engagements, particularly of monolingual Spanish speakers, Indigenous community members, youth, and the business community. We'll be going and meeting people where they are, not asking everybody to come to us, but also going out into the community with pop-up events. Some ideas around posting up at a grocery store or community events, and engaging a wider audience in conversations around climate change, and also recruiting promotoras to work with us as our climate ambassadors, and both building up the skill sets and knowledge locally, and working with trusted messengers to help us with those community dialogues. And finally, we have one more slide, I believe, before I turn it over to Louis. And here's just a quick glimpse at our project team. So you can see City of Tucson right in the center. I'm serving as the project director, really responsible for the overall success of our team and making sure that we're all coordinated. And we're working closely with the project management team at the city, including Tim, Fatima Luna, and Jeremiah Dean. Right below me, you'll see Louis Spanias, who is on, and he'll take the next set of slides. Louis is responsible for the day-to-day management of the planning process.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Louis Spanias. I use he, him, his pronouns, and as Chris mentioned, I'll serve as the day-to-day project manager for this effort. Spent several years in the sustainability and climate action space as well, both in the public and private sector. And I just wanted to echo previous sentiments really quickly, emphasizing how exciting this project is for us. And for me personally, being an Arizona native, I was born and raised in Tempe. I have sincere passion and affection for this project, and I couldn't be happier to be involved with and to speak about this project with the mayor and city council. So it's a real privilege for me and for us. So thank you. So following on from Chris, just want to briefly give an overview of the scope of work for this effort as agreed upon with the city and in alignment with its desired priorities and the expressed values of the mayor and the city council. The starting phase of this project is really defined by our engagement with the city and our outreach to the city and the community at large. We've already started engaging with city departments to get a thorough understanding of the programs, policies, and initiatives to date, many of which were highlighted earlier in this presentation related to climate action, all of which will inform an existing conditions assessment and gap analysis, all of course in the context of achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. We have also started working on a marketing and communication strategy, which will be developed in partnership with the city's leadership to determine the messaging, the branding, and the communication strategy around the plan. Perhaps the single largest piece of this effort, shy of drafting the plan itself, will be the community engagement piece. Chris, of course, spoke to the approaches and priorities earlier, but we expect this community engagement to reach beyond a solicitation of input and feedback and to instead delve into the realms of collaboration and community development so that we create a meaningful and equitable plan. As aforementioned, the community engagement piece will largely be led by our partner, Living Streets Alliance. And as Chris mentioned, we're working on that engagement strategy right now for the city's review and approval. We can move to the next slide, Tim. So the next phase of this project will really be defined by analysis using city resources and research efforts to date. We will develop a risk and vulnerability assessment to better understand the impacts of relevant climate hazards to the city of Tucson through 2030 and beyond, identifying parts of the city and the communities especially that are and will be the most vulnerable and stand to face the greatest impacts from climate change over time. Accompanying this vulnerability assessment will be an analysis of the city's greenhouse gas emissions and the development of business as usual forecasts and scenario pathways that lay out the city's emissions trajectory, assuming no additional actions would be taken, as well as the potential impact of various mitigation strategies toward achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. And using the findings from our engagement efforts, as well as these analyses, we'll begin to develop mitigation and adaptation strategies with opportunities for real review and input and collaboration by the community at large and city leadership. And our analyses and strategy development will be supported by the research and knowledge of our partners at the University of Arizona, including Professors Courtney Crossan and Ladd Keith. You can move to the next slide, Tim. The final phase will be defined by planning efforts and development. First, as mitigation and adaptation strategies are being finalized, our partners at AutoCase will perform cost-benefit and multi-criteria decision analyses to inform an implementation plan. So identifying the most cost-effective and impactful priorities with respect to strategies for implementation. A monitoring, evaluation, and reporting plan will also be developed to lay out the means by which the city will monitor, evaluate, and report out on its performance, specifically focused on how the city can use that information to better execute the broader climate action adaptation plan going forward. Our work, of course, will conclude, I should say, with a draft copy of the plan that will be reviewed by the city and the community at large, and of course, an updated final plan by the conclusion of this calendar year. Tim, you can move to the next slide. And I'll just quickly conclude with this schedule. It's a high-level schedule summarizing our estimated time frame for completion for each of these components. As you might estimate, the first half of this engagement will largely be focused on preparation, learning, and analysis. And the second half of the year will really be focused on creating the strategies, developing the plan itself and all of its components, of course, with meaningful city and community engagement really throughout the entirety of the project, never really stopping. So with that, that concludes sort of an overview of the scope and the schedule of the project, and I will hand it back to Tim.
Thank you, members of the Borough Happold team and Mayor and Council. With that, we're happy to entertain any questions that you have for us.
Well, I just wanted to welcome to the team, Borough Happold. I really appreciate your work and passion and what seems to be excitement for the work ahead in the city of Tucson. So welcome to the team, and happy we have you on board. We are very lucky to have you doing our climate action and adaptation plan. And with that, I want to allow my colleagues time to ask questions and get into the nitty gritty in terms of the details and logistics as we move ahead. I do see my colleague, Councilmember Dahl, with his hand up, and then Councilmember Cunningham. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and welcome to the team. Borough the plan looks great. And I am on climate change, much like the mayor did, and it's become more and more urgent. Greta Thunberg told us years ago this is an existential crisis, and she was so right. And she really railed on politicians for not doing anything. So thank goodness we're politicians that are doing something, right? Myself and my staff want to be part of helping you in every way possible. We have many of those areas in my ward that need climate equity and climate justice is the word I like to use. We need to provide climate justice, coming from the tradition of environmental justice, which is my background. I have some concern about plans. Sometimes people do plans rather than doing action. And I know that the city of Tucson doesn't do that. We're starting to plant the trees. We're starting to investigate other opportunities. And I think between now and when we're talking about supplementals for the next fiscal year, it's important that we program in some things to get started. Our goal of 2030 is, I don't think we can't miss it. It's that important. And that's 8 years from now. So if we take a year off, that's, 12.5%, if my math is right, and it's often not, of the time we've allocated to make these important changes. But again, looks like you guys have a lot of experience. Give us great advice, and we're going to make a great team. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. You're muted.
Once a meeting. A few things. I hope you guys consider incorporating rainwater harvesting, stormwater conservation. We're at the cutting edge of that. We've kind of led the way in the desert. Our sustainability and our desert sustainability relies on water sustainability, long-term water conservation. So I kind of want to put that bug in here now before we move on. The other thing we've been working on out of Ward 2 is some type of mechanism in which housing associations and neighborhood associations can group purchase rooftop solar. We think that's a great avenue to go through. A lot of people see that loan or that solar home equity loan, or they see a just regular loan, or they try to pay cash and it's just too much. But when you are doing 7, 8, 9, 10 rooftops at the same time and only using 1 meter as an HOA, it can be a much better thing. It can be done completely privately. That way you don't need the interference of the government, like the Arizona Corporation Commission, that actually sometimes actively works against rooftop solar. So I'd like to see you guys consider that piece. Finally, I urge you, I know you're probably doing it anyway, but just to cover my bases, you guys should meet with each council office. We've got each one of us, and I can't speak for my colleagues per se, but I know who the city staff are who work in council offices. We've got a lot of great people with a lot of experience for environmental advocacy. And I think it'd be important that you hear what they have to say. So those are my things. Welcome aboard. Best of luck to you. Eventually, I'm going to ask the hard question during budget season on how much we're paying for this. But obviously, we don't need to have that discuss. I'm sure we'll get that answer very shortly. Thank you.
Just to remind you, Councilmember Cunningham, that the mayor and council did put aside $250,000 for this effort. But yeah, no, it's definitely, we have to make sure that we continue budgeting for the efforts, right? Because it's not like Councilmember Dahl said, it's not just about planning, but it's about instituting action immediately, which I believe this mayor and council has done an amazing job, not waiting around for an official climate action plan, but we've taken very aggressive steps towards our goals. With that, Councilmember Lee.
This is probably the best study session item of all time. I'm really trying not to geek out too much right now, but it's hard. So I'm really excited about everything that we're working on. Similar to what Councilmember Dahl and Cunningham have said, several of us have tremendous experience. I have the privilege, when I'm not doing city council work, to work in the space of carbon sequestration in the agriculture industry. So I could geek out with you all day, and I know none of us have time for that, but I would love to stay connected as closely as possible to this work. I've got Post-it notes everywhere full of different ideas that I would love to put into something to get some traction. So whatever we can do to stay connected and integrated into this process, I would really appreciate it. So thank you all for all of the work that went into where we're at and where we're going.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. And absolutely, part of the planning is to visit with each and every one of your offices, asking you how we best engage your residents in your ward, and making sure, I mean, I'm so happy, Councilmember Lee, that you think this is the best study session agenda item ever, because I do too. It is very exciting where we are. It's very exciting, the caliber of consultant that the city of Tucson has been able to bring on board. And absolutely, each and every one of my colleagues on the council, the city manager, department directors, are going to be part of this because we can only get this done together. So Tim, I don't know if you want to add any additional comments, or Mr. Manager, or Chris or Louis, if you wanted to finish with something.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I think that concludes our presentation. I do see two hands up, though. One additional comment from Chris, and then it looks like Councilmember Fimbres' hand is up as well.
So let's go with Councilmember Fimbres, and then we can finish the item with Chris. Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to congratulate you, Madam Mayor, for the team for putting this together. And I also want to make sure, remind everybody, Los Reales is in my ward, so we're looking forward to really put it together. We already talked to a lot of people, and we need to make change, especially for the future and long-term sustainability of our great city. Thank you. And welcome aboard, guys.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Chris, you'll finish us off today.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for the warm welcome. I can't say it enough. We're so excited to be working with the city of Tucson. You all have a tremendous legacy of having been actively working on climate action. And we have such a great foundation to build upon. The one thing that I will say is that we are going to create a beautiful looking document for you, but a plan is not a document. And the measure of our success is really going to be, how do we mobilize all of Tucson to really be acting upon climate? That includes city government, it includes community partners, and that is really what we're striving to do here. So let's check back in a few months and see how it's going.
Thank you so much. Wonderfully done, Tim, Chris, Louis. We're looking forward to the work together. So with that, we move on to item 8. Thank you to
got one for Chris.
Sure, go ahead.
Just kicked a rock. Chris, we want more than a pretty document. We want to engage. We want to get things done. We want to be active with this. We don't need a pretty document to set on the coffee table at the end of a year. So meet with all of our offices. I know that we've all got some actionable thoughts and direction, and yeah, I look forward to talking to your team.
And okay, I think that before we go, absolutely agree. We will get a beautiful document, highly informed document by Chris and Lois, but I'm excited because the initial presentation, the presentation that we just saw, is full of action items that we're going to start work on. And the presentation that Tim Tamir presented to us is full of action that this particular mayor and council have already done. So we are making Chris and Lewis's life really easy. One, because you have a mayor and council that are 100% fully on board. And two, that we've already taken amazing steps to get to where we are today. So I'm not afraid that we're just gonna get a document. I know for a fact that this team, including my colleagues on the council and I, are going to start action immediately. So thank you all so much for the presentation. We are all, as you can see, very excited, willing to put the work into it, and really wanting to make sure that each and every Tucsonans has the opportunity to buy into this and work hard to where we need to get. So with that, I will move on to item 8. Thank you. Item 8, we have state and national legislation and regional committee issues for discussion. I do see Andrew Greenhill. Go ahead, Andrew.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, provided some updates on state and national legislation for you the last couple of days, including this morning in response to questions from Mayor and council. I've also asked the clerk to distribute a number of state legislative bills for your consideration today. The recommendations are in the document. Happy to answer any questions about any of the bills. If not, I'd respectfully welcome a motion to support the recommendations in today's report.
So moved.
Councilmember FEB, there's a
Second.
motion. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Councilmember Kozachik.
Yeah, I just have a question. Andrew, Senate Bill 1446, reading your document, removes authority from cities to assist with the acquisition, construction, or rehabilitation of housing in housing development areas. Really? That we would be allowed to play no role in providing housing within our community? Is that what the intent of this is?
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilmember Kozachik, unfortunately, yes, that is the intent of the bill.
Crap.
And that's why I recommend opposition, not only for all the reasons you're suggesting, but also it goes contrary to the effort that we're all trying to work together on, which is to increase the opportunity for all entities, including cities, to participate in increasing the supply of affordable housing.
And so who do they propose would pick up that burden? The state?
I don't want to guess on the intent of the sponsor of the bill, but my sense is that their interest is in keeping government out of the housing area, with the idea that the private sector would take on additional efforts.
Yeah, and they're doing a wonderful job. Thanks.
Oh my goodness, thank you for calling this one out, Steve. Councilmember Cunningham?
Just for the record, who are the two sponsors of this bill?
Honorable Mayor and Council, Councilmember Cunningham, Senator Rogers, Wendy Rogers was the sponsor of 1446.
Are we allowed to let constituents who call our offices, can we give them her number?
Sure. I'm a Mayor and Council, Councilmember Cunningham. The phone numbers of the elected members of the state legislature are public record. And if you'd like, I can make sure that Mayor and Council have an updated list of all members' phone numbers.
Look, and I'm not saying, look, there's people who call because they are currently without residence. There's people who call who are being evicted. There are also people who are called because they have a problem with people who are currently without residence running around their neighborhood. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. But right now, that and obviously, of course, potholes, but whatever, are 90% of our calls. And everybody at this table knows that. And we're working actually pretty hard to try to come up with creative solutions to help with this crisis. And we're actually getting someone working against us. We have got to be the only city in the country that has a state all the time and a county part of the time that works against our interests. We got to be the only one in the country. I mean, this is unbelievable. So anyway, I would like to get the phone numbers of the sponsors of this bill so I can put them in my newsletter.
Yeah, and there are others, by the way, that Andrew, if things are moving really fast, Andrew generally opposes bills that he feels the mayor and council have taken positions on issues on. And so he had to move really fast. I don't know if you all saw the story in yesterday's paper. HCR 2031 is a constitutional amendment to prohibit local minimum wage laws, would refer it to the ballot in 2022, preempting local minimum wage and benefit laws, including those approved by previous voters. So it's not just going forward, but Tucson would be one of those cities where they could actually go back and dismantle what the voters of Tucson have voted on. There's also one that HB 2447, which is a concealed carry on college campuses. There is a HB 2701 tax reduction for construction contracting, which would actually hit our budget if it were to pass. I mean, it goes on and on and on. There's SB 1496, which would undermine the Wayfair decision that basically saved the coffers of cities and towns throughout Arizona during the pandemic because so many people went into online purchasing. So it would undermine systems of taxation and collection established by the Wayfair bill. We're not even talking about reproductive justice bills, homelessness. I mean, they're just thinking of how they can tie our hands of cities and towns and just dumping that as their legislative agenda. It is a horrible time for preemption and for cities and towns throughout Arizona. Good thing is that most of these bills, the League of Cities and Towns and other Arizona cities are weighing opposition to all these bills. Councilmember Fimbres, and then Andrew, if you need anything else besides that motion.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Has any updates on HR 3706 on the federal level for the postal centers? And then the other thing is, has there been anything assigned to the Senate from HCM 2002? I want to thank Representative Andrea Sandro for passing it on the 51-7 motion. And HR 3706 was very positive.
Sure. So Honorable Mayor and Council, and Councilmember Fimbres. So first, the federal bill, as I mentioned at the last study session, the United States House of Representatives approved the postal reform bill that we've been working on for many years in a pretty strong vote of support, bipartisan. Very happy about that. And then your question was, well, when is it going to get heard in the Senate? We were hopeful that it would be heard the following week. There was a technical issue with the bill as it came from the House to the Senate that set back the schedule a little bit. We do expect, and we've checked with Senator Sinema's office on this, we do expect the bill to come to the floor of the Senate next week when they're back in session. So that's good news.
Thank you.
As far as
HCM,
sure. And then as far as HCM 2002, this is the memorial in the State House of Representatives that expresses the state's support for Cherry Bell. Happy to announce that that bill was not only approved by the committees in the House, but it was approved by the full House last week by a vote of 51-7, very strong vote of support. Now the bill moves over to the Senate. It has been assigned to a Senate committee, the Senate Government Committee. They just haven't had a committee meeting yet. But once it is put on an agenda for the Senate Government Committee, we will lobby in support of that bill and again, hopefully get it through the Senate as well and get it to the governor's desk for his signature.
Thank you, Andrew. Anything we should be doing?
Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Fimbres, at this point, I think we've been pretty successful. Again, once it gets to the Senate Government Committee, we'll be reaching out to all the members on that committee. If there are any issues, if anyone has questions or wants to hear from our mayor and council, we'll make sure you know about that so that you can join us in a strong, statement of support for the bill.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Did we give you the motion and the vote that you needed, Andrew?
Mayor, I believe there was a motion and a second. I don't believe there was a vote.
Alrighty, so is there any? Sure. Councilmember Fimbres, did you have a question?
No, ma'am, just a call for the question and we'll vote on it.
Okay, so if there's no additional discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any against? Motion passes. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate your work.
Thank you, Mayor.
So we move on to item 9. Does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda? Councilmember Cunningham?
Your Honor, I'm going to remove H. I know that the manager touched on it earlier. Just kind of a quick discussion to reiterate where we are. I think we're going to come to a positive resolution. I'm really optimistic, but just want to get a few more details.
Thank you. So we're removing item H. Any others? Alrighty, hearing none. We move on to item 10. Does anyone have any future agenda items to add? Councilmember Dahl, and yes. I don't know if Councilmember Fimbres, you have your hand up, but Councilmember Dahl, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to ask for a study session on the Silver Bell Road widening. There's concerns from both the Tucson Mountain Association and from wildlife organizations about the sizing of the wildlife crossings, and it's best we deal with that before we go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahl. Let's make sure that we schedule that. Any others?
No, Madam Mayor, my hand was up accidentally. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. So I have the good news that we are done with study session, everyone. We finished at an incredible timing, so you have a little bit less than 2 hours. Yay, to move around and hopefully have your dinner and get ourselves ready for our regular agenda, which will start sharply at 5:30 p.m. So with that, study session is adjourned, and the next regularly scheduled study session will take place Tuesday, March 8th at 2 p.m. or maybe earlier in the afternoon. Thank you all. Enjoy your time off. We'll see you at 5:30.
Bye, everyone.